This Vice News article is hilariously bad. This journalist goes on BiggerPockets and tries to find a reason to hate on landlords, and he does a terrible job at it. And I give you all the reasons why this article is not to be taken seriously. There's clearly an agenda with this journalist, as he provides only lazy arguments, and it looks like he's trying to incite the reader into jump on this bandwagon of hating on landlords. He seems to want to get the reader into believing that this website is all about evil landlords getting together to discuss how they can take advantage of all these poor little renters, all just for profit. I think right now we're seeing a lot of anger and frustration out of the millennials and a lot of people who are unable to afford houses as housing prices surge in a lot of markets in the country. And I think what this article is doing is it's trying to incite that fear and that anger that some people won't ever be able to own a home. He seems to think that these landlords have huge portfolios and that it's ugly that they can not only own their own property, but they can own other properties where they can make additional streams of income. If you frequently visit sites like Reddit, you'll see growing hostility of renters towards landlords. Now, I've seen this recently, and it's not much. This isn't like a huge popular opinion, but you'll see it plenty. And there are plenty of subreddits that are all about tenants not having to pay too much for rent, and that how the landlord should not be making money off tenants. Just a few examples for hilarity's sake. So these are a couple titles I came across just with a quick Google search. Private landlords shouldn't be allowed to rent their property without caps. Capitalism shouldn't reward the ownership class more than working professionals. And landlords are parasites. A lot of people right now are struggling to afford homeownership, and I think the common rhetoric is that these landlords are the reason why they can't. I think they see it as these rich, evil, capitalist landlords owning all these properties, which are reducing the supply in their neighborhoods and driving the price up out of affordability of these poor tenants. I think what they're thinking is that all of these landlords are making so much money and stuffing their pockets. Notice the words that the article uses, stuffing their pockets, as if it's insinuating they're making so much money off these poor tenants. Using this urban.org website, we see some data on who actually owns these homes. So from the article, it looks like there are only 2% of the single family home market is purchased by institutional investors. Now, these are going to be the big dogs. These are going to be the people that can buy up houses with cash in plenty. And these are the people you actually have to worry about. They're in the multifamily market. So if you're renting apartments, which serves a totally different purpose, I think that's a completely different argument. So if you're looking at houses not being able for you to purchase, it is not these big institutional investors you need to worry about. And in this data, it also looks like 90% are owned by landlords with 10 or fewer properties. Nearly 90%, 10 or fewer properties. Within the BiggerPockets community, we constantly talk about $100 a month cash flow for single family houses. It's not like these people are stuffing their pockets. And it looks like about 60% of all of these single family homes are owned by a landlord that only owns their property plus another couple of properties. So it's not like they own a bunch. Again, these are mom and pop investors that are just trying to get by. They're investing in extra property so that over time they make a little wealth. But these are people that are by no means wealthy, and they're absolutely not evil capitalists. Now, I totally understand why articles like this are getting made, and we have this national conversation going on right now about home affordability. If you look at this chart, you can see that home ownership has been in a rapid decline for quite a while now. So I totally understand why people are getting upset. Overall, home ownership is down, but also millennials are seeing a big hit in ownership versus previous generations. I found this good article from apartmentlist.com that went into a millennial home ownership report in 2018. You can see that 9 out of 10 millennial renters want to purchase a home, but few plan to do so in the near term. 9 out of 10 want to do so. Of all the people that plan on purchasing a home, so these are the people that plan on it, just 4.9% say that they will do so within the next year. 72% of millennial renters who plan to purchase a home cite affordability as a reason that they are delaying home ownership, with 62% pinpointing a lack of down payment savings specifically. The only problem with millennials is even Vice points out the hypocrisy, and that is they even show you articles on millennials are taking on credit card debt because we can't afford necessities. But then literally 2 or 3 articles before that, they talked about, we asked young people why they're into Botox. I don't know, maybe it's a consumer debt issue, maybe it's a priorities issue. Throughout the United States, I think we're seeing a widening gap between the renters and the landlords. And I think this coincides with the income gap or wealth gap that we're also seeing between the haves and the have-nots. In this census.gov document I found, on page 2 you can find a couple of really helpful charts on the median asking rent for vacant for rent units in the past 24 years. And it's pretty apparent the increase in rent in current dollars too. So it looks like they even use inflation. So you can see that it's more than doubled in 20 years. I mean, that's pretty wild. And then you also see the median asking sales price on the same page. In the last 20 years or so, it is about tripled. What you have is an increase in rent so that you're decreasing the net income of renters, that meaning they are saving less, which ties in with those statistics that I gave you on millennials on how the biggest issue seems to be the down payment. Well, if these renters aren't able to save up much, they're increasing their consumer debt, increasing in student loan debt, and then they're saving less, they're not able to afford homes, and I don't see any reason why this is going to change anytime soon. I recently made a video on living paycheck to paycheck and how people can get themselves out of it. It's a really helpful video. In the past 5 to 10 years, I've seen rent increase everywhere. And I think what renters are feeling is that landlords are making all this money because with every year an increase in rent must mean more money in the pocket of these greedy landlords. So I can understand the unease that they feel. Feels like maybe the landlord's taking advantage of them. This article seems to touch on the idea of quality of tenants. Now, it handpicks some snarky comments in a website with 100,000 messages, and he happened to find a couple that went along with his narrative. Now, if you think about real estate investing, it's an interesting business model in that the product is available for the customer to rent. So think about car rental companies, think about Redbox movie rentals, and even think about renting a sex doll. Whenever companies rent out their product to customers, do you think they care about who borrows from it? Of course they do, which is why most take a credit card on file so that if you damage it, they can charge you and recoup the cost. At the end of the day, real estate investors are running a business. We're running a business where profit is the bottom line. When we make an investment, we're putting in cost, we're fixing up the property, we need to see a profit so that it makes sense and that we can keep the property safe for you, the tenant. And the thing with tenants is the worse the tenant, the more it costs the investor. The more it costs the investor, the less money we have in our pocket. And the less money we have in our pocket means less money to keep the property safe for you. And what happens with bad tenants, and the reason why on Bigger Pockets you can find a lot of comments talking about getting rid of bad tenants and figuring out how to remove them from your property, is because our risk goes up massively with bad tenants. They damage the property, they don't pay, you have to cost money for evictions, you have to deal with headaches, and we don't want to deal with that. We want good tenants because there are plenty out there. The journalist is able to comb through the hundreds of thousands of comments on Bigger Pockets and happens to find a couple that follow along with this narrative of landlords talking about petty tenants. And look, at the end of the day, it's up to the owner to figure out how he wants to run his business. If he doesn't want to change light bulbs, if he doesn't want to fix the AC, or if he doesn't want to repair the property to make the place great, then the tenant's going to move out and no other tenants are going to want to move in. And when no tenants move in, he's going to have only expenses and no income, and it's going to force him to either adapt or lose his business. But the thing that I don't understand with articles like this is that there are laws that help tenants make sure that they live in habitable units or dwellings, and they are protected. I did a quick search for the Nevada state laws, and NRS 118A.290 talks about the habitability of dwelling units, and there's a lot of things in here that are for landlords to make sure that they are providing a great dwelling or unit for the tenant. If one of those rules are broken and the tenant believes that they're living in a place that is uninhabitable, then they can sue the landlord and get their rent covered for the month or months that are applicable for breaking of this rule. And there always needs to be a balance between landlord and tenant. Tenants need to understand that the landlord isn't responsible for absolutely everything with the property. If there's one single roach, he doesn't have to come over to the house and kill it. But on the flip side, the landlord needs to understand that the tenant is living there and they are a human being and need to live in a nice place. And at the end of the month, tenants can always move out. And what does that mean? That means that the landlord must go find a new tenant. And if you were a good one, they're going to miss you. Trust me. Because that means they need to spend energy, possibly money, and their time going out and finding a new tenant to sign a new lease. And if there were problems with the property, he or she is going to have to fix them right away, or they're going to have troubles finding a new tenant. Notice the words the journalist uses, a power imbalance. Do you feel a power imbalance when you go rent a car from Avis? Do you feel a power imbalance whenever you go rent a movie from the Redbox? Landlords provide a service, and renters need this service. Therefore, they pay a pretty reasonable fee for use of the service. Little thought experiment. What would happen if all of these big institutional investors with a lot of money went out and bought up houses and then didn't leave them available for rent? All of the renters wouldn't have a place to live. Now all of a sudden rent is a pretty reasonable fee for access to housing. Now there is some truth to this quote. If someone is renting at way below market rates, of course the landlord is in for profit and wants to increase the rent to market rate. The landlord is running a business. It is in 100% of their interest to please the tenant, not displease them. You please the tenant with a well-operated house or unit. You please them with the safety of knowing that when there is something that breaks and needs fixing, that the landlord will come in and fix it for them. You please them with the security of having a roof over their head and walls to block out potential intruders. It makes no sense to displease a tenant. They are your revenue for your business, and they have way too many rights for you to try to go out and do harm on them. And look, all companies out there who rent out their product to customers are always looking for a fair price for use of that product. Raising rents is seen as evil, but what that tells me is that the tenant was living at below market rates for a certain period of time, sometimes a full year. Sounds like to me that they were actually getting a better end of the deal. This is a funny little story. When told about a very believable rumor in the crunch San Francisco housing market, prospective renters brought baked goods to open houses to win over potential landlords. That's interesting. It's almost like they realize the value that a landlord brings to the market. Now, look, if the landlords are terrible and not providing a habitable unit or dwelling to you, of course, there's things you can do. You don't need to do a rent strike. You just need to bring it up to the applicable people. But I think what is going on here is he's trying to make it clear to tenants that they need to be against landlords. And it's clear that there's an us versus them mentality and a groupthink here where it needs to be about us versus them, and they're evil and we are the good guys. We should not be paying rent if we think they're capitalizing too much on us. And a rent strike is such a hilariously bad idea. Why not just threaten the people who put a roof over your head? What could go wrong? I think what's most disappointing about this article is that there's no mention of what it's like to actually be a landlord. You need a lot of money for a down payment. You need money set aside for reserves. You need money set aside in case of any repairs, because of course you want to fix it right away. You need time and energy set aside for finding tenants whenever you have a vacancy. You need to be able to run a business properly. And worst of all, you may be providing a product where a customer can use it without paying for it. And unfortunately, you have to go through the eviction process, which costs money and time and lost money from rent that is not coming in. In conclusion, this article never mentions BiggerPockets being a place where hundreds of thousands of investors go to talk about strategies on how to run their business the best they can, which typically involves being a great landlord for tenants. Because our interests co-align, it's in our best interest to run a property really well so that the tenant enjoys living there, pays a fair price to live there, but also we provide a great living situation for them. If you think about it, the landlord has to charge market rate for rent, because if he charges too much, the renter's going to go elsewhere, meaning he has no income and can't run his business. If a tenant is looking for too low of rent and they're not willing to pay the price to live anywhere, then they risk not having a house. So what I see is a kind of market equilibrium where you have landlords that need renters in place, so they're going to offer it at market rates. And then you have renters that want a good unit at a fair market price, and they're willing to pay it. So whenever you have a tenant living in a house provided by a landlord, you essentially have a fair deal. The tenant signed up at a price he believed was fair, and the landlord is offering the place at a fair price, and they agree on it and sign a lease for typically 12 months. I hope you really enjoyed this video, and I definitely hope you got some value out of it. If you watched the whole video, thank you so much. Make sure to go ahead and hit like. Please leave a comment if you agree or disagree, or just want to ask a question about the article. And as always, please subscribe if you want to follow me along on my journey from zero to financial independence within the real estate industry, and I'll share with you exactly how I did it so you can replicate it as well.